There is a moment that will come for every person who has ever lived. The moment when your heart stops beating, when electrical activity in your brain ceases, when the chemical reactions that have sustained you for decades come to an end. This is death. The termination of biological function. The point where the collection of cells and molecules that constituted you stops maintaining itself against the constant pressure of entropy. And when this moment arrives, physics has very specific things to say about what happens next. Not speculation, not philosophy, but testable, measurable, observable physical processes that have been studied and documented and understood through centuries of scientific investigation. Here is what physics says. You disappear, not in the sense that you cease to exist entirely, but in the sense that the organized pattern of matter and energy that was you disassembles. The structure falls apart. The atoms that composed your body scatter. The energy that powered your thoughts and movements dissipates as heat. The information encoded in the configuration of your neural networks dissolves as brain cells die and decompose. The person you were, the consciousness you experienced, the subjective inner world that felt like you, ends permanently, completely, with no physical mechanism for recovery or continuation. This is not opinion, this is observation. We have examined thousands of deaths, monitored brain activity as it ceases. Watch the cascade of molecular changes as cells run out of oxygen and ATP and begin breaking down. There is no mystery about the physical process, no hidden variables, no unknown forces that preserve consciousness after brain death. When your brain stops functioning, the pattern of neural activity that corresponded to your conscious experience stops occurring. And consciousness, as far as physics can determine, is that pattern. It is what a functioning brain does. When the brain stops functioning, consciousness stops. Just as music stops when the orchestra stops playing, just as a flame stops when fuel is exhausted. The pattern depends on the process. End the process, and the pattern ends with it. But this is only part of the story. Because while the pattern called you disappears, the components do not. The atoms that made up your body continue existing. The energy that powered your metabolism gets transferred to the environment. The carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen that were assembled into your cells are disassembled and redistributed. Nothing is destroyed. Everything is merely rearranged. This is fundamental. The first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The total amount of energy in the universe is constant. When you die, that energy does not vanish. It changes form, goes elsewhere, but persists. Consider what you are physically. An adult human body contains roughly 7 billion atoms. That is 7 times 10, 27 atoms. This enormous number of particles is organized into cells, roughly 37 trillion cells depending on body size. These cells are not independent. They communicate through chemical signals, electrical potentials, molecular exchanges. Together they form systems: digestive system, cardiovascular system, nervous system, respiratory system. Each system performs specific functions necessary for survival, and all of them require continuous energy input to maintain organization against entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, the tendency of organized systems to become disorganized over time. A sandcastle erodes, a hot object cools, a living organism dies. All of these reflect entropy increase. The universe moves toward maximum disorder. Life fights against this temporarily by consuming energy. You eat food, extract chemical energy, use it to maintain cellular organization, to power metabolism, to generate heat, to move muscles, to think thoughts. But this is always temporary. Eventually, energy input stops, metabolism ceases, and entropy wins. The organized structure begins falling apart immediately. Here is what happens in the first minutes after death. The heart stops pumping blood. Oxygen delivery to cells ceases. Without oxygen, cells cannot perform aerobic respiration, cannot generate ATP efficiently. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, the molecule that powers nearly every active process in cells. When ATP runs out, active transport across cell membranes fails. Ion gradients collapse. Cells lose their ability to maintain internal conditions different from external environment. This is the beginning of decomposition. Brain cells are especially vulnerable. Neurons require enormous amounts of ATP to maintain the sodium-potassium pumps that establish membrane potentials. These potentials are the basis of neural activity. When ATP depletes, the pumps fail. Membrane potentials collapse. Within 4 to 6 minutes at room temperature, irreversible brain damage occurs. The pattern of connectivity that encoded memories and personality and consciousness degrades. Some of this degradation is chemical. Proteins denature, membranes rupture, but much is informational. The specific configuration of which neurons connect to which other neurons, through which synapses, with what strengths, represents information. When cells die, this configuration is lost. Like a hard drive being physically destroyed, the data is not moved elsewhere. It is erased, gone, unrecoverable through any known physical process. This is why brain death is death in the legal and practical sense. The pattern that was you no longer exists. The physical substrate that instantiated that pattern has been destroyed. Even if the body could be revived somehow, the person would not return, because the person was not the atoms. The person was the pattern. And patterns require substrates. When the substrate is destroyed, the pattern is lost, but the atoms persist. Within hours after death, decomposition accelerates. Cells rupture. Internal bacteria that were previously confined to the intestines spread throughout the body. These bacteria begin breaking down tissues. Proteins are cleaved into amino acids. Lipids are broken into fatty acids and glycerol. Carbohydrates are metabolized. The chemical bonds that held your body together are systematically dismantled by bacterial enzymes, and the energy stored in those bonds is released, some as heat, some as chemical energy used by bacteria to grow and reproduce. None is lost. All is conserved, just redistributed. Over weeks and months, the process continues. If buried, your atoms gradually return to the soil. Carbon becomes carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or dissolved carbonate in groundwater. Nitrogen becomes nitrate used by plants. Phosphorus becomes phosphate incorporated into new biological molecules. Calcium in your bones slowly dissolves, enriching the soil. Every atom that was you becomes part of the environment, part of the ecosystem, part of the ongoing cycle of matter through Earth's biosphere. This is not metaphor. This is literal chemistry. The carbon atoms in your body right now were once in other organisms. Plants, animals, bacteria, fungi. Some of those atoms were in dinosaurs, some in ancient trees, some in the first photosynthetic organisms billions of years ago. Carbon cycles through life continuously. You are borrowing these atoms temporarily. When you die, you return them. They will become part of new organisms, new people, new plants. The atoms persist, the pattern changes, but the substance is eternal within the bounds of Earth's biosphere. Zoom out further. The atoms in your body were not made on Earth. Hydrogen formed in the Big Bang. The simplest element, one proton, one electron. Roughly 70% of your body is water. H2O. The hydrogen in that water is 13.8 billion years old. It has existed since the universe was 3 minutes old, when protons and electrons combined during Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Those specific hydrogen atoms have been part of countless molecules over cosmic history: water in ancient seas, ice in comets, molecules in interstellar clouds. Now they are part of you, temporarily. When you die, they will continue existing, become part of other molecules, other organisms, other structures across deep time. The heavier elements are even more remarkable: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, calcium, iron. None of these formed in the Big Bang. They were created in stars. Through nuclear fusion in stellar cores, helium fuses into carbon, carbon into oxygen, oxygen into silicon, silicon into iron. Each step requires higher temperatures and pressures. Occurs in more massive stars. The iron in your blood was forged in a dying star billions of years ago. That star exhausted its nuclear fuel, collapsed, exploded as a supernova. The explosion scattered iron and other heavy elements into space. Those atoms drifted through the galaxy, eventually became part of the molecular cloud that formed the solar system, condensed into Earth, were incorporated into life through evolution, and now they are part of you. This is what Carl Sagan meant when he said, "We are made of star stuff." It is literal truth. Every atom in your body, heavier than helium, was created in stellar nucleosynthesis, or supernovae. You are assembled from the ashes of dead stars. When you die, those atoms return to the environment. Eventually, they may be ejected into space through volcanic activity or asteroid impacts. Become part of interstellar dust. Be incorporated into new stars and planets in distant future. Your atoms are immortal. They have existed for billions of years. They will exist for billions more, perhaps trillions if protons are stable. The pattern of you is temporary, but the substance is nearly eternal. Now consider energy. Your body consumes roughly 2,000 calories per day. That is 8,400 kilojoules, about 2,000 kilocalories in scientific units. This energy comes from food. Plants captured sunlight through photosynthesis, converted electromagnetic radiation into chemical bonds, glucose, starches, lipids. Animals ate plants, concentrated the energy. You ate plants or animals, broke down the molecules, extracted the energy stored in chemical bonds, used it to power metabolism. The energy ultimately comes from the sun, from nuclear fusion in the solar core, hydrogen fusing into helium, mass converting to energy via E equals mc squared. That energy traveled 150 million kilometers to Earth, was captured by chlorophyll, passed through food chains, and now powers your thoughts as you read these words. When you die, this energy flow stops. No more food intake, no more metabolism. But the energy does not disappear. It dissipates. Your body cools to ambient temperature. The thermal energy is transferred to the surroundings. The chemical energy in your tissues is extracted by bacteria and decomposes. They use it to grow, to reproduce, to maintain their own metabolism. The energy passes from you to them, from them to other organisms. The flow continues. Energy is conserved. The first law of thermodynamics never fails, not even at death. But something is lost. Not atoms, not energy, but information, organization. The specific configuration of atoms that was you. This is what the second law of thermodynamics describes. Entropy increase. You are a low entropy state, highly organized, maintained, far from equilibrium, through continuous energy input. When energy input stops, entropy increases, organization decreases. The system moves toward equilibrium. Your body temperature equalizes with surroundings. Your tissues break down into simpler molecules. The information encoded in cellular organization is lost, not because atoms disappear, but because the arrangement is destroyed. Think of it like a sand castle. The sand grains persist after the castle is destroyed, but the castle is gone. The information about where each grain was placed relative to others is lost. Entropy has increased. The organized structure has become disorganized. This is irreversible without external energy input. You cannot spontaneously reassemble the sandcastle. You cannot spontaneously resurrect the dead. Both violate the second law. Entropy decrease in closed systems never occurs, and biological organisms are not closed systems. But without continuing energy input to fight entropy, they rapidly fall apart. So what does physics say about consciousness after death? Nothing persists. Consciousness is a physical process. It requires a functioning brain, neural activity, information processing. When the brain dies, these processes stop. Consciousness stops with them. There is no soul substance that leaves the body, no non-physical essence that continues independently. These are dualist ideas from philosophy and religion. Physics finds no evidence for them. Every aspect of consciousness that has been studied corresponds to physical brain activity. Damage specific brain regions, and you lose specific cognitive functions. Interrupt neural activity with anesthetics, and consciousness ceases temporarily. When brain activity stops permanently at death, consciousness ceases permanently. There is no physical mechanism for it to continue. This is sometimes called the materialist or physicalist view, the position that mental states are identical to brain states, that consciousness is what brains do, not some separate thing that brains produce. When functionalists say consciousness is a pattern of information processing, they mean the pattern is instantiated in physical neural activity. Abstract the pattern, and you lose the consciousness. Consciousness requires the substrate, requires the ongoing physical process. When the process stops, consciousness stops. There is no storage location, no backup, no continuation after the substrate fails. Near-death experiences are often cited as evidence against this view. People who were clinically dead report vivid experiences, tunnels, light, feelings of peace, encounters with deceased relatives. These experiences are real in the sense that people genuinely report them, but they occur during dying, not after death. When oxygen to the brain is reduced but some neural activity persists. Under these conditions, the brain behaves abnormally. Visual cortex neurons fire randomly, creating tunnel vision. Temporal lobe activity generates feelings of presence. Endorphins create euphoria. Memory systems malfunction, creating false sense of life review. All of these are documented effects of dying brain activity. They do not require continuation of consciousness after complete brain death. They are the last gasps of a failing nervous system. When brain activity completely ceases, no reports come back. Because there is no one to report, the person is gone. What remains is a corpse. A collection of cells that was once organized into a living human but is now decomposing matter. The atoms will persist, the energy will be conserved, but the pattern is erased. The consciousness has ended. This is what physics says, not what we might wish to hear, but what the evidence indicates. Yet there is something profound about this physical truth. You are not separate from the universe. You are part of it, made from the same atoms as stars and planets and galaxies, powered by energy from fusion reactions in the solar core, subject to the same physical laws as everything else. When you die, your atoms return to the cosmic inventory. They become available to build new structures, new life, new consciousnesses. You are a temporary eddy in the flow of matter and energy through the universe. The eddy dissipates, but the flow continues. You came from the universe. You return to the universe. The circle is complete. This provides a kind of immortality, not personal survival, but material continuation. Every atom in your body will exist long after you die. They will become part of other things, other people. Your carbon will be in trees, in oceans, in the atmosphere. Your nitrogen will be in proteins, in bacteria, and plants and animals. Your oxygen will be in water molecules and carbon dioxide, and countless other compounds. You will be dispersed, distributed, diluted across the biosphere and eventually across space and time. No longer you, but still part of the ongoing cosmos. And there is beauty in this. You are made of ancient stars. You will become future stars, not as a conscious entity, but as material, as atoms, as the stuff of which everything is made. This is the physical answer to what happens after death. The pattern called you ends, the substrate persists, the atoms continue, the energy is conserved. And the universe, indifferent to individuals, nevertheless remembers everything through the conservation laws that govern physical reality. Nothing is lost, everything is merely transformed. This is what physics says. This is what the evidence shows. This is what happens when you die. But physics only describes what happens. It does not address why it matters. It does not provide meaning or purpose or comfort. These come from other sources, from relationships and accomplishments and the impact you have on the world while alive, from the memories others carry of you, from the ideas and creations you leave behind. These are not physical in the same way atoms are physical. They are informational, cultural. They persist in human minds and institutions and records. They are another form of continuation beyond the physical body, not immortality of consciousness, but immortality of influence, of legacy, of the effects you had on the universe during your brief time as an organized pattern within it. This is the first part of the story. What physics says about death, the material answer, the atoms and energy and entropy and conservation laws. But there are deeper questions about information, about identity, about what it means to be you rather than someone else, about whether patterns can persist in ways beyond simple atomic continuation. These questions lead us beyond simple thermodynamics into quantum mechanics and information theory and philosophy of mind, into questions about whether information can be preserved even when the substrate is destroyed, whether consciousness is fundamentally pattern that could be instantiated in different substrates, whether the universe preserves information in ways we do not yet understand. This is where we turn next, to the quantum question, to information conservation, to the paradoxes of identity and persistence, to the possibility that while physics says the pattern disappears, information theory might say something different, to the strange intersection of consciousness and quantum mechanics, where some physicists speculate that information, unlike atoms and energy, might be truly indestructible, not in a way that preserves personal consciousness after death, but in a way that suggests the universe remembers everything that ever happens, even if we cannot access those memories. This is the deeper question. Not what happens to your atoms, but what happens to you, to the pattern, to the information that constituted your consciousness, and whether anything of that information persists after the brain that encoded it has decomposed into constituent atoms scattered across Earth and eventually across space and deep time. There is a principle in physics that will challenge everything you just learned about death. We established that your atoms persist while the pattern of you disappears, that consciousness ends when the brain stops functioning, that physics sees no mechanism for survival after death. But quantum mechanics introduces a profound complication, a principle so fundamental that it underlies our understanding of reality itself. Information cannot be destroyed, not diminished, not lost, not erased. Every quantum event that occurs anywhere in the universe creates information that must be conserved. The universe remembers everything, every particle collision, every photon emission, every neural firing in your brain, all of it encoded permanently into the quantum state of the cosmos. If this is true, then what happens to the information that was you? If information cannot be destroyed, does some record of your consciousness persist after death, even if the consciousness itself does not? This is not philosophy. This is a direct consequence of quantum mechanics and the laws of physics. as we currently understand them. Begin with the black hole information paradox. In the 1970s, Stephen Hawking discovered that black holes are not completely black. They emit radiation through quantum effects near the event horizon. This Hawking radiation causes black holes to slowly evaporate. Over timescales of 10-67 years for solar mass black holes and 10-100 years for supermassive ones, they radiate away all their mass and disappear completely. But here is the problem. Hawking radiation appears to be thermal, completely random. It contains no information about what fell into the black hole. If you throw an encyclopedia into a black hole and wait for it to evaporate, the Hawking radiation that comes out seems to contain no trace of the information that was in the encyclopedia. The information appears to be destroyed, erased from the universe permanently. This violates quantum mechanics. Quantum evolution is unitary. Information is conserved. The quantum state at time 2 can always in principle be calculated from the quantum state at time 1. The evolution is reversible. Run time backward and you recover the initial state. This is fundamental. It underlies everything from quantum computing to particle physics. If black holes destroy information, then quantum mechanics is wrong, or at least incomplete. The paradox troubled physicists for decades. Some argued that information is indeed destroyed inside black holes, that quantum mechanics has exceptions, that information conservation is not absolute. Others insisted that information must be conserved somehow, that it is encoded in the Hawking radiation in subtle ways we have not yet understood, that black holes are unitary systems like everything else. Recent theoretical work suggests the latter. Information is preserved, not in obvious ways, but encoded in correlations between Hawking radiation particles, in the quantum entanglement structure of the radiation, in the precise timing and energy distribution of emitted photons. If you could measure the Hawking radiation with perfect precision over the entire lifetime of the black hole, you could in principle reconstruct what fell in, including the encyclopedia, including every atom, including every quantum state. The information is scrambled beyond practical recoverability, but it exists. The universe remembers. Now apply this to consciousness. Your brain is a physical system. Neurons firing, molecules moving, quantum states evolving. Every thought you think involves specific patterns of neural activity, specific configurations of neurotransmitters binding to receptors, specific electrical potentials across membranes. All of this is physical. All of it is governed by quantum mechanics at the fundamental level, even if classical approximations suffice for most neural processes. And if quantum mechanics conserves information, then every brain state you ever experienced is encoded permanently somewhere in the universe's quantum state. The information about who you were does not disappear when you die. It gets scrambled, distributed, encoded in the particles that were once your brain, and then in the radiation they emit and the particles they interact with. Tracing this information is impossible practically, but in principle it exists. This seems to offer a form of immortality, not survival of consciousness, but preservation of information. The universe contains a complete record of every conscious experience you ever had, not accessible, not readable, but present, encoded in quantum correlations across space and time. When you die, this information persists. It becomes part of the information content of the universe, scrambled with everything else, but never truly lost. The cosmos remembers you, even if nothing can read those memories. But does this matter? Does preservation of information about you constitute any meaningful form of survival? Consider what information means in this context. Information is not a thing. It is a measure of how many yes or no questions you need to ask to specify a state. Shannon information, measured in bits. Your brain at any moment has a specific state. That state could in principle be specified by measuring the position and momentum and quantum states of every particle. This would require enormous numbers of bits, perhaps 10, 25 bitses to fully specify a human brain at quantum level. This information exists. It distinguishes your brain state from all other possible brain states. And according to quantum mechanics, this information is preserved even after your brain decomposes. But preservation is not continuation. A photograph preserves information about a scene, but the photograph is not the scene. It does not continue the dynamic processes that were happening when the photograph was taken. It is a static record. Similarly, the information about your brain state that is preserved in quantum correlations is a record, not a continuation. You, as a conscious process, end when the brain stops functioning. The record persists. But records are not experiences. They are potential experiences for anyone who could read them. If no one can read the quantum information scrambled across the universe, does it matter that it is preserved? This leads to profound questions about personal identity. What are you? Are you the atoms that compose your body? No, because those atoms are replaced over time. Cells die and are replaced. Molecules are broken down and rebuilt. After 7 years, most atoms in your body have been replaced, yet you feel like the same person. Continuity of consciousness spans the material turnover, so you are not the atoms. Are you the pattern, the specific arrangement of cells and synapses? Closer, but the pattern changes too. You learn, you forget. Brain connections strengthen and weaken. Your personality shifts over decades. The pattern evolves, yet some continuity persists. You remember your past. Your experiences build on each other. There is a thread connecting the 5-year-old you to the 50-year-old you, even though atoms and patterns have both changed completely. Perhaps you are the information, the abstract pattern that persists across different substrates and evolves over time. This is the functionalist view. Consciousness is not tied to specific atoms or even specific physical arrangements. It is a pattern of information processing. This pattern could, in principle, be instantiated in different substrates. Carbon-based biological neurons, silicon-based artificial neurons. Any physical system that can implement the same information processing would generate the same consciousness. Your consciousness is substrate independent in principle, even though it is currently instantiated in a biological brain. If this is true, then consciousness is fundamentally about patterns and information, not about carbon and neurons specifically. This opens the possibility of mind uploading. If we could scan your brain at sufficient resolution to capture the relevant information, if we could map every connection and every state, if we could replicate this pattern in a computer simulation, would the simulation be conscious? Would it be you? This is intensely debated. Some philosophers argue yes, consciousness is pattern. Replicate the pattern and you replicate the consciousness. Upload your brain to a computer and you achieve digital immortality. Your consciousness continues in the simulation even after your biological brain dies. Others argue no. Consciousness requires biological substrate. There is something special about neurons and neurotransmitters that cannot be captured by abstract information processing. Or perhaps consciousness requires quantum effects that classical computers cannot replicate. Or perhaps uploading creates a copy of you, but not a continuation. The simulation might be conscious. It might think it is you. It might have your memories and personality, but it is a different entity. You still die when your biological brain stops. The simulation is a twin, not a continuation. Your subjective experience ends, even if an identical subjective experience begins in the computer. This is the personal identity problem. Are you the same person after uploading? There is no objective answer. Personal identity is not a physical property that can be measured. It is a conceptual category we impose on continuous processes. The question of whether uploaded consciousness is you or a copy has no empirical test that could distinguish them. Both possibilities are consistent with all observable facts. This suggests the question might be meaningless, or at least that it depends on definitions rather than physical facts. If you define personal identity as continuity of memories and personality, then yes, the upload is you. If you define it as continuity of biological substrate, then no, it is a copy. Neither definition is objectively correct. They are conventions. But there is a deeper problem. Even if uploading is possible, even if it creates genuine continuation of consciousness, it does not solve death. It postpones it. The computer running the simulation will eventually fail. Hardware degrades, power sources run out, the universe itself may end. Even a perfect simulation cannot run forever in a universe governed by thermodynamics. Entropy always increases. Eventually, all useful energy is dissipated. All structures break down. The heat death of the universe. At that point, no computation is possible. No consciousness can persist. Digital immortality is not true immortality. It is merely extended lifespan. Longer than biological life, but still finite. Still ending in death eventually. Some physicists have speculated about ways around this. If consciousness could be slowed down to match the decreasing energy availability in the far future, subjective time might be stretched indefinitely. The objective universe ages trillions of years. But from the consciousness's internal perspective, only hours pass because thought processes are running so slowly. Frank Tipler proposed that in collapsing universe models, computation could accelerate during the final contraction, allowing infinite subjective experience in finite objective time. But these are speculative scenarios depending on unknown physics and cosmology. Current evidence suggests the universe will expand forever, cooling toward absolute zero. In that future, no complexity persists. No information processing occurs. Everything becomes diffuse radiation, filling an exponentially expanding void. Perhaps the most unsettling proposal about information and death comes from quantum mechanics' many worlds interpretation. In this view, every quantum event splits the universe into multiple branches. Each possible outcome occurs, but in different branches. You observe one outcome. Other versions of you in other branches observe other outcomes. When you die in one branch, you continue living in other branches. There are branches where the disease is cured, where the accident is avoided, where aging is stopped. In those branches, you survive. And since you can only experience branches where you are alive to experience anything, perhaps subjectively you never die. You always find yourself in a branch where you survived. This is quantum immortality. The logic is disturbing. Consider Russian roulette with a quantum random trigger, a device that fires a gun based on quantum measurement outcome. 50% probability of firing. From an external observer's perspective, you have 50% chance of dying, but from your subjective perspective, you can only experience outcomes where you survive. The branches where you died have no conscious experience. Only the branches where you lived contain an experiencing you. So even though you pull the trigger repeatedly, you always find yourself in the branch where the gun did not fire. External observers see different versions of you dying in different branches, but your subjective experience is continuous survival. You never experience death because death by definition ends experience. This implies you are subjectively immortal in many worlds interpretation, not because anything prevents your death, but because you cannot experience the branches where you died. Only branches with living conscious versions of you contain experiences that feel like your experiences. So, from the inside, it seems like you always survive, no matter how improbable, even if only one branch in trillions has you surviving to age 200. That is the branch you experience. The trillions of branches where you died earlier exist but contain no experiencing version of you. Most physicists reject this as meaningful immortality. Even if many worlds is correct, which is debated, the subjective immortality argument has problems. It assumes continuity of identity across branches, but each branch contains a slightly different version of you, different experiences, different memories. Are they all you? Or are they similar but distinct entities? And even if subjective immortality is real, external observers still see you die. Your loved ones mourn, your body decomposes. The universe does not behave as if you survived. Only your subjective experience continues in increasingly improbable branches. Is that enough? Is subjective continuation without external persistence meaningful? These questions bring us back to the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there subjective experience at all? Why does information processing in brains feel like something from the inside? A computer processes information without experiencing anything. It has no inner life, no subjective perspective. Why is the brain different? What makes the difference between unconscious information processing and conscious experience? This is the hard problem, and we have no solution. No physical explanation for why some information processing systems are conscious while others are not. No understanding of what makes the difference. Integrated information theory proposes that consciousness is identical to integrated information. Systems that integrate information across many components generate consciousness proportional to the degree of integration. Human brains integrate enormous amounts of information across billions of neurons. This generates rich consciousness. Simple systems integrate little. They have minimal consciousness. The theory provides mathematical measures. Phi, the amount of integrated information. Calculate phi for any system, and you determine its consciousness level. Brains have high phi. Computers have low phi, even if they process more total information, because they integrate less. The integration is what matters. If IIT is correct, then consciousness is substrate independent, but organization dependent. Any system with the right organization generates consciousness, regardless of whether it is made of neurons or transistors or anything else. And when that organization is disrupted, consciousness ceases proportionally. At death, neural organization breaks down rapidly. Phi decreases. Consciousness fades. The integrated information that was your conscious experience dissipates. The information persists as quantum states, but it is no longer integrated, no longer organized in ways that generate consciousness. The consciousness is gone, even though the information remains. Near-death experiences are often cited as evidence that consciousness can exist independently of physical brain. People who were clinically dead report vivid experiences, floating above their body, moving through tunnels toward light, encountering deceased relatives, feeling profound peace. Some report accurate perceptions of resuscitation efforts they could not have witnessed from their unconscious state. These experiences feel real to those who have them. They seem to provide direct evidence that consciousness continues when the brain is not functioning normally, that something of you persists beyond physical death. But neuroscience offers alternative explanations. Near-death experiences occur during dying, not after death. Clinical death is not brain death. The heart may stop, but neurons continue firing for minutes. During this time, oxygen deprivation causes abnormal brain activity. The visual cortex generates random patterns perceived as tunnels or light. The temporal lobe produces feelings of presence or mystical unity. Endorphins flood the brain, creating euphoria. Memory systems malfunction, creating life review experiences. All of these are documented effects of dying brains. They do not require consciousness existing independently of brain function. They are what happens when brain function is failing but not yet completely stopped. The apparently accurate perceptions during resuscitation can be explained by brief moments of consciousness during revival attempts, or by information reconstructed after the fact from sounds and other sensory input. Studies of near-death experiences find that reported details are often inaccurate when checked. People remember things that did not happen, or misremember timing and sequence. This is consistent with brain reconstruction of events rather than actual perception from disembodied consciousness. When brain activity ceases completely, measured by EEG showing flatline, no experiences are reported, because there is no functioning brain to have experiences. This does not diminish the profound impact near-death experiences have on those who experience them. They feel absolutely real. They change lives. They reduce fear of death. They create sense of meaning and purpose. These psychological effects are important regardless of metaphysical interpretation, but they do not provide evidence for consciousness existing independently of brain. They are what dying brains do: complex subjective experiences generated by failing neural systems. When those systems fail completely, experience stops, the person dies. And while information is conserved at quantum level, that conservation does not constitute continuation of consciousness any more than preserving a photograph constitutes continuation of the photographed scene. So, what can we say about information and death? Information about your brain states is preserved according to quantum mechanics, but preservation is not continuation. The information is scrambled beyond any practical recovery. It cannot be read or accessed. It does not generate ongoing experiences. You, as a conscious process, end when the brain stops functioning. The atoms disperse. The energy dissipates. The pattern dissolves. And the information, while theoretically preserved in quantum correlations across the universe, is irretrievably lost for all practical purposes. No mechanism exists for reassembling that information into a functioning consciousness. No way to recover the person from the quantum record. The universe remembers, but memories without a mind to experience them are just information. Patterns of correlations with no experiencer, no subject, no you. Yet there are other ways information about you persists that are more tangible than quantum correlations. Your DNA exists in your children if you have them. Your ideas exist in the minds of people you influenced. Your actions have causal consequences that ripple forward through time. The books you read shaped your thinking, which shaped your choices, which shaped events around you. These effects persist even after you die. They are information about you in a different sense, not complete records of your brain states, but traces of your existence, impacts you had on the world. These constitute a legacy, a form of informational immortality that is more accessible and more meaningful than scrambled quantum states. When someone who knew you remembers you, they are processing information about you, creating a simulation of you in their neural network. This simulation is crude, incomplete, but it captures something of who you were, your personality, your characteristic behaviors, your way of thinking. As long as someone remembers you, some information about you persists in functioning brains. This is not you. It is a compressed representation, but it is more of you than quantum correlations in radiation from your decomposing atoms. It is information that still generates experiences, even if those experiences belong to other people rather than to you. You live on in others' memories in a limited but meaningful way. This brings us to the question of what actually survives death. Your atoms persist but scattered and recycled. Your energy is conserved but dissipated as heat. Your information is preserved at quantum level but scrambled beyond recovery. Your memories in others fade over generations. Your legacy in the world persists longer depending on what you did, but eventually even that fades. Stars die, galaxies disperse. The universe expands toward heat death. In 10, 100 years, black holes evaporate. In 10, 1,000 years or more, proton decay may erase all remaining matter. Everything ends, eventually given enough time. There is no true immortality, no permanent persistence, only temporary continuation. longer or shorter depending on scale, but always finite, always ending. Physics and information theory together paint a picture where the person dies but traces persist. Atoms continue. Energy is conserved. Information at quantum level is preserved, though inaccessible. Memories in others fade gradually. Causal effects propagate forward but diminish. Eventually, nothing remains that could be recognized as you. The pattern is erased. The information is dispersed. The effects are diluted. You become part of the background, indistinguishable from the cosmic noise. This is what happens after death from the perspective of physics and information theory. Not comforting, not uplifting, but honest, based on what we can measure and test and understand about how the universe works. And yet we must acknowledge the limits. We do not understand consciousness, do not know why subjective experience exists, do not know if information theory captures what matters about being alive. These are profound mysteries. Perhaps someday we will discover that consciousness is more fundamental than current physics suggests, that information preservation implies something we do not yet understand about persistence of experience, that quantum mechanics has features we have not yet discovered that allow for consciousness continuation in ways that seem impossible by current theories. We must remain humble about what we know and what we do not know. Death is universal, but understanding it completely may be beyond current science. This leads us to the final question. If physics says you disappear and information theory says only scrambled records persist, what actually happens when you die? Not just physically, but meaningfully. How should we think about death given what science tells us? Is there any reason to hope for more than material recycling and information preservation? Any basis for believing in continuation beyond the physical? These questions require us to go beyond pure science into philosophy and meaning, and confronting the gap between what we can measure and what we care about. This is where we turn next. To the question of what death means given that we now know what death is physically, to reconciling scientific truth with human hopes, to finding meaning in mortality. There is a question that physics cannot answer. We have established the material facts. Your atoms persist. Your energy is conserved. Your information is preserved in quantum correlations, though scrambled beyond recovery. Your consciousness ends when brain activity ceases. The pattern that was you dissolves while the components continue. But none of this addresses the question that matters most. What happens to you? Not to your atoms, not to your energy, not to information about you, but to you. The subjective experiencing entity that feels like it exists behind your eyes looking out at the world. The thing that makes you you rather than someone else. What happens to that when you die? This question has no scientific answer because it asks about something science cannot measure: consciousness from the inside, the subjective perspective, the first-person experience of being. Physics describes objective third-person reality, what observers can measure and quantify and predict. But consciousness is inherently subjective. It is the one thing you cannot observe from outside. You can only experience it from within, and that experience ends at death. After that, there is no one left to report what it was like. The subjective perspective terminates. And science, which requires observations and measurements, has nothing to say about what that termination means for the experiencing subject. Consider the difference between dying and being dead. Dying is a process, measurable, observable. We can track brain activity decreasing, cells running out of ATP, neurons ceasing to fire, consciousness fading. This is all within the domain of science. But being dead is not a process. It is the absence of process. No brain activity, no metabolism, no consciousness, nothing experiencing anything. Science can describe the physical state of a dead body, but it cannot describe what being dead is like, because there is no experience to describe. Being dead is not like anything. It is the absence of experience. the end of subjective perspective. This creates a profound asymmetry. You can imagine what dying might be like based on reports from people who came close and survived. But you cannot imagine being dead, because imagination is an experience, and being dead involves no experience. Trying to imagine being dead is like trying to imagine what it was like before you were born. There is nothing there to imagine. No darkness, no silence, no void, not even absence in the sense of missing something. Just nothing, the complete cessation of the subjective perspective that constitutes you. But here is what disturbs people about this physical truth. It feels incomplete. It explains what happens to the body but seems to miss what matters. When we ask what happens after death, we are not really asking about atoms and energy. We are asking whether we continue, whether the experiencing subject persists, whether there is anything after the ending. And to that question, physics responds with silence, not because the answer is unknown, but because the question asks about something that may not exist. The experiencing subject that feels so real and central to existence might be an illusion, a trick of neural processing, a story the brain tells itself, and when the brain stops, the story ends. There is no subject that continues, because there never was a separate subject. Only brain processes that generated the feeling of being a subject. This is the view of many neuroscientists and philosophers of mind. The self is not a thing, it is a process, an ongoing construction by the brain that creates the feeling of unified, continuous identity. But this construction is fragile and easily disrupted. Damage the right brain regions and the sense of self fragments. People with split brain syndrome, where the corpus callosum is severed, appear to have two separate consciousnesses in one body. The left hemisphere reports one thing, while the right hemisphere controls different behavior. Which one is the real self? Both? Neither? The question becomes meaningless. The self is revealed as construction rather than fundamental entity. If the self is constructed, then it can be deconstructed. Death is ultimate deconstruction. The brain processes that generated the feeling of being, you stop. The self-narrative ends. There is no ghost that leaves the machine, because there was never a ghost, only the machine, only neurons firing in patterns that created the illusion of someone inside observing and experiencing. When the neurons stop, the illusion stops. The lights go out, and there is nothing left to notice that they went out, because the observer was itself part of what ended. But if this is true, then what were you when you were alive? If the self is illusion, who was experiencing the illusion? There must be something it is like to be you, otherwise there would be nothing to explain. The hard problem of consciousness is precisely this. Why is there subjective experience at all if we are just physical processes? Why does information processing in brains feel like something from the inside when information processing in computers does not? What makes the difference? We do not know. And this ignorance should make us humble about claiming we fully understand what ends at death. Perhaps consciousness is more fundamental than current physics suggests. Perhaps it is a basic feature of reality, like space and time and mass. Panpsychism proposes this. Every physical system has some degree of consciousness. Electrons have infinitesimal consciousness. Rocks have slightly more. Brains have enormous amounts through complex integration. In this view, consciousness does not emerge from unconscious matter. It exists at all levels. What emerges is complex consciousness, from simple consciousness through organization. When you die, the complex organization breaks down, but the fundamental consciousness that was always there might return to simpler forms. Your consciousness would not continue as unified human awareness, but it would not completely disappear. It would dissolve into the micro-consciousness of constituent particles. This is speculative metaphysics. No evidence supports it over materialist alternatives. but it demonstrates that the scientific story is not complete. We do not understand consciousness well enough to say definitively what happens to it at death. Physics tells us brain activity ceases, but whether that means consciousness ends completely or transforms or disperses depends on what consciousness is, fundamentally, and we do not know what it is. We only know that it exists because we experience it directly. Everything else is inference and theory and guesswork. Now consider personal identity. What makes you the same person today that you were yesterday? Not the same atoms. Those change constantly. Not the same patterns. Memories fade. Connections rewire. Personality shifts. Yet some continuity exists. You remember being yesterday's you. You care about tomorrow's you. You make plans that assume future you is still you. This continuity is what we mean by personal identity. But what creates it? What makes the person who wakes up tomorrow the same person who fell asleep tonight? The standard answer is psychological continuity, memory and personality connecting moments across time, but this creates problems. Consider gradual replacement of neurons with functionally identical artificial neurons. Replace one neuron, still you. Replace 1,000, still you. Replace them all, gradually over years. At what point do you stop being you and become someone else? Or is the gradual replacement sufficient to maintain identity? If so, then identity is not about substrate, but about continuity of function and pattern. You could be uploaded to computer through gradual replacement and still be you. Your consciousness would continue unbroken, even though the material substrate changed completely. But now consider splitting. Upload your brain to two computers. Both simulations have your memories and personality. Both think they are you. Both feel continuity with your past. Are they both you? If yes, then you are not one unique entity, but a pattern that can be duplicated. If no, then which one is you? How do you decide? This is the personal identity problem, and it has no clean answer. Personal identity is not a physical property that can be measured. It is a concept we impose on continuous processes. And sometimes that concept breaks down, gives ambiguous or contradictory results. Because identity is not fundamental, it is constructed. A useful fiction that works in normal circumstances but fails in edge cases like uploading or splitting. Death is an edge case. The process that was you stops. Does identity continue? The standard view says no. Identity requires continuity, and death breaks continuity completely. But consider this possibility. Every night you sleep, consciousness fades. For hours, you experience nothing. No dreams, no awareness, just absence. Then, consciousness returns at waking. Is the person who wakes the same person who slept? By all usual criteria, yes. Memory continuity, physical continuity, causal connection. But subjectively, there was a gap, an absence of experience. Yet we do not worry that we die every night and a new person wakes each morning. We assume identity persists through unconsciousness. Why not through death? If identity can survive 8 hours of unconsciousness, why not 80 years? If the pattern could be reinstantiated after death, if some future technology could reconstruct your brain state from preserved information, would the reconstructed consciousness be you, or a new person with your memories? This depends entirely on your theory of personal identity. If identity requires unbroken causal chain of physical processes, then no, it is a copy. If identity is pattern-based, and reconstruction preserves the pattern, then yes, it is you. Neither answer is objectively correct. They reflect different philosophical positions about what identity means. The practical answer is that no technology can reconstruct you after death. The information is too scrambled, the atoms too dispersed, brain structure degrades too quickly. Once neurons die and decompose, the specific connectivity pattern is lost. You cannot rebuild consciousness from scattered atoms any more than you can rebuild a sandcastle from sand that has blown away. The information existed briefly, but dissipated with entropy. So while abstract philosophical questions about identity remain unsettled, the practical reality is clear. When you die, you are gone. No reconstruction is possible, no continuation occurs. The person ends, but something else continues. Your impact, your legacy, the changes you made to the world, every action you took caused effects that ripple forward through time. You spoke words that changed someone's thinking. You made choices that altered events. You created things that persist after you. These are not you, they are traces of you, footprints in time, and they continue long after you die. This is a form of immortality, but not personal immortality, not continuation of consciousness, rather continuation of influence, of effects, of the difference your existence made. Consider how you came to exist. Your parents conceived you, but their ability to do so depended on their parents existing, and so on back through generations. Your existence depended on specific historical events, wars that your ancestors survived, migrations they undertook, chance meetings that led to relationships. Any different outcome, and you would not exist. The specific person you are depends on billions of contingent historical facts. You are the product of vast causal chains converging, and your existence now creates new causal chains diverging into future. Everything you do influences what comes next, and those influences persist. Your genetic legacy, if you have children, half your genes in each child, quarter in each grandchild, the fraction decreases, but persists for generations. After 10 generations, roughly 1 in 1,000 genes comes from you, small but real, and those genes influence traits and behaviors. You persist diluted in your descendants. This is biological immortality. Limited, diminishing over time, but real. Your DNA continues when you do not. This is why evolution works. Genes that improve survival and reproduction persist. The organisms die, but the genes continue. You are a temporary vehicle for genes older than humanity. When you die, the genes move to new vehicles. The process continues. Your mimetic legacy, memes in the original sense, ideas that replicate through minds, something you taught someone who teaches someone else, an idea you shared that spreads, a practice you started that continues. These are mental patterns that persist through cultural transmission, like genes but in information space rather than DNA. Successful memes spread widely and persist for generations. Most memes die quickly, but some become part of culture. If your ideas influence people who influence others, your memes persist long after you. This too is immortality, not of consciousness but of patterns, your way of thinking living on in others. Your physical legacy, things you made or built, art you created, buildings you designed, inventions you developed. These persist as long as they are maintained, longer for some than others. Pyramids last millennia, paintings centuries, books as long as copies exist. Digital files potentially forever if maintained. These artifacts carry information about you, about what you valued, how you thought, what you created. Future people examining your works can infer things about you. You communicate across time through what you leave behind. This is preservation of information in accessible form, unlike scrambled quantum correlations. It is partial immortality, not of consciousness but of expression, but all of these are limited, temporary. Eventual death awaits everything. Genetic lineages go extinct. Species die out, memes are forgotten, artifacts decay. The sun will become a red giant and destroy Earth. The Milky Way will collide with Andromeda. Stars will die, galaxies will disperse, the universe will expand toward heat death. In the far future, nothing remains. No genes, no memes, no artifacts, no information accessible in any form. Everything ends given enough time. There is no escape from final dissolution, only postponement, longer or shorter depending on what persists, but always finite. This seems depressing, nihilistic. If everything ends, what is the point? Why do anything if all effects eventually fade? But this reaction misses something important. Meaning does not require permanence. The fact that life is temporary does not make it meaningless. A beautiful sunset is not less beautiful because it lasts minutes. A good meal is not less enjoyable because it will be digested. A loving relationship is not less valuable because both people will die. Temporary things can have profound meaning while they exist. The meaning exists in the experience, in the moment, in the relationships and accomplishments and joys that fill a life. These do not need to last forever to matter. You matter because you exist now, because you experience joy and suffering, because you can make choices, affect others, create beauty, reduce suffering, share love. These activities have value inherent in their doing. The value does not depend on eternal consequences. A kind act has value because it helps someone, even if the help is temporary. A creative work has value because it expresses something even if it will eventually be lost. A life has meaning because it is lived even if it ends. Meaning is not about permanence, it is about significance, about what matters to you and those you affect. And that significance exists regardless of whether anything permanent results. This is where physics and meaning diverge. Physics describes what happens. You die, atoms scatter, energy dissipates, information persists in unreadable form, consciousness ends. This is the objective third-person account. But meaning is subjective, first person. It depends on values and relationships and experiences that cannot be quantified. Physics says nothing about whether life is worthwhile, whether death should be feared, whether anything matters. These are not physical questions. They are existential questions. Questions about how to live, given that we will die, how to find purpose in finite existence, how to create meaning in an indifferent universe. Different people answer these questions differently. Religion provides one set of answers. Most religions claim some form of continuation after death. Christianity promises resurrection and eternal life. Islam describes paradise. Hinduism and Buddhism teach reincarnation, or release from rebirth cycle. These doctrines give meaning to death, frame it as transition rather than ending, provide hope for reunion with loved ones, promise justice and reward for earthly suffering. For believers, death is not the end, but the beginning, the doorway to something greater. This provides comfort, reduces fear, makes suffering tolerable through belief in eventual reward. Physics cannot prove these beliefs wrong, cannot demonstrate that consciousness definitely ends at death, can only say that no physical evidence supports continuation. That brain activity corresponds perfectly with consciousness. That disrupting brain function disrupts consciousness. That when the brain dies completely, no mechanism exists for consciousness to persist in absence of the physical substrate that generated it. But these are observations about physical processes. They do not prove that consciousness is only physical. They do not rule out non-physical soul or continuation in ways physics cannot detect. Science is limited to what it can measure. If consciousness continues in non-physical form, science would not detect it. So religious beliefs remain unfalsifiable, possible if unprovable. The tension is between faith and evidence. Faith says consciousness continues because sacred texts or religious authorities say so. Evidence says consciousness depends on brain function and ends when brain dies. Faith requires believing without evidence or despite contrary evidence. Science requires proportioning belief to evidence. These are incompatible epistemologies, ways of knowing that cannot be fully reconciled. You can believe both but only by keeping them separate. Accepting scientific facts about physical death while maintaining religious faith in spiritual continuation. Many people do this, hold both perspectives simultaneously, even though they give contradictory answers about what happens after death. But there is another approach. Accept what science tells us about death while finding meaning without requiring survival. Recognize that consciousness likely ends while appreciating that life has value anyway. That temporary existence can be meaningful, that making positive impact matters even if the impact eventually fades, that love and beauty and truth are worth pursuing even though we die. That consciousness is rare and precious and should be protected and enhanced while it exists, even though it is temporary. This is secular humanism, finding meaning and ethics without supernatural beliefs, building purpose from human values and relationships rather than cosmic significance or eternal consequences. This view acknowledges death honestly, does not pretend we know things we do not know, does not make comforting claims unsupported by evidence. Death is probably final end of consciousness. The person ceases. The subjective perspective terminates. There is no afterlife, no reunion, no continuation, just ending. This is hard truth, uncomfortable, sometimes devastating, but recognizing it can be liberating. If this life is all we have, it becomes more precious, more urgent, more worth living fully. The temporary nature of existence does not diminish its meaning. It intensifies it, makes every moment count, because moments are all we get. You will die. This is certain. When and how are unknown, but the outcome is guaranteed. Your atoms will disperse, your energy will dissipate, your consciousness will end. The pattern that was, you will dissolve. Information about you will persist in scrambled form, but unreadable and inaccessible. This is what physics tells us. This is what evidence supports. This is likely what happens, not definitely. We remain ignorant about consciousness fundamentals, but probably. Based on everything we know about how brains and minds and physical processes work, you will die, and that will be the end of you. But before that ending, you exist. You are conscious. You experience. You choose. You matter to yourself and to others. This existence, however temporary, is remarkable. The universe is mostly empty space and radiation. Consciousness is rare. Complex organized matter is unusual. Life is improbable. You are a statistical anomaly. A temporary fluctuation of organized complexity in a universe trending toward disorder. And that makes you precious. Special not in cosmic terms, but in human terms. Your consciousness is one of countless brief sparks of awareness, lighting up corners of the universe before winking out. While your spark burns, it matters. To you, to those around you. That mattering does not require eternal duration. It is enough that it exists now. What should you do with this temporary existence? Physics has no answer. It describes but does not prescribe. Science tells you what is, but not what ought to be. That comes from values, from ethics, from what you care about. Most humans value similar things: connection with others, reduction of suffering, beauty and truth and creativity, love and friendship and meaning. These are not physics concepts. They are human concepts, but they are real as experiences. They matter to the creatures capable of experiencing them, and they provide guidance for how to live even without cosmic significance or eternal consequences. Reduce suffering where you can, your own and others. Cultivate relationships, create beauty, seek truth, be kind, help others. These activities make life better while it lasts. They do not need supernatural justification. They are self-justifying, better than alternatives, worth doing because they improve experience, make temporary existence more worthwhile. This is pragmatic ethics, not based on commands from authority, not requiring eternal reward or punishment, just recognition that some ways of living are better than others by standards we care about, and those standards are enough. You will leave traces. Atoms that were you continuing in new forms. Energy you used becoming heat warming the universe infinitesimally. Information about you preserved in quantum correlations no one can read. Memories in people who knew you fading over years. Impacts you made on the world diluting over generations. Eventually, nothing remains that could be recognized as connected to you. But for a while, you persist in these forms. And while you do, while anyone remembers, while any effect can be traced to you, something of you continues. Not consciousness, not the person, but echoes, shadows, ripples spreading outward from where you were. This is the answer physics allows. You disappear as organized pattern. The consciousness ends, but the components persist. The influence continues. The temporary existence had value while it lasted. You were here. You experienced. You made choices. You affected the world. And those facts remain true forever, even after you are gone. The universe remembers through physical law, even if no conscious memory remains. The atoms that were you carry that history forward. The space-time you occupied is forever marked by your existence. Not in ways anyone can read, but in the deep structure of reality where every event leaves traces that can never be fully erased. Perhaps this is enough. Perhaps we do not need personal survival to find meaning in life. Perhaps temporary existence, with real impacts and genuine experiences, provides sufficient purpose. Perhaps consciousness ending at death is acceptable if consciousness while alive was worthwhile. Perhaps the atoms continuing and energy conserving and information preserving in unreadable form is a kind of immortality, even if not the personal kind we might wish for. Perhaps accepting death honestly and living fully anyway is better than believing comfortable lies about survival. Or perhaps we need the hope that religion provides. Perhaps faith in continuation makes mortality bearable. Perhaps believing in reunion with loved ones and eventual justice and cosmic meaning is necessary for psychological well-being. Perhaps some truths are too hard to accept without comforting myths. Different people need different answers. Science provides one answer. Religion provides others. Philosophy provides still more. Each person must choose what they believe, what gives their life meaning, what makes death acceptable or at least endurable. What actually happens when you die? Your body stops functioning, brain activity ceases, consciousness ends, atoms disperse, energy dissipates, information persists in scrambled form. This is the physical answer, the scientific answer, the answer supported by evidence. But it is not the only answer, because it does not address what the question really asks. What happens to you? The experiencing subject, the one who feels alive. And to that question, science can only say, the experience stops, the subject ceases. There is no more you to experience anything, not darkness, not void, not even nothing in the sense you can comprehend, just the absence of subjective perspective, the end of the story that was your life. Is there more? Could consciousness continue in ways science cannot detect? Could something of you persist beyond physical death? Perhaps. We do not know everything. Consciousness remains mysterious. Information preservation might mean more than we understand. Quantum mechanics might have implications we have not discovered. The universe might be stranger than current science suggests. So absolute certainty is unwarranted. But probability favors the scientific answer. Consciousness likely ends at death. The person ceases. What persists is trace, not continuation. Echo, not voice. Memory fading, not experience continuing. This is what happens when you die based on what we know about physics and biology and consciousness and death. It is honest. It is uncertain in details but probable in outline. It is uncomfortable. It provides no cosmic comfort, no promise of reunion, no hope for personal survival. But it is our best answer given current knowledge, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps knowing what probably happens is better than hoping for what might happen. Perhaps facing mortality honestly is brighter than denying it through faith. Or perhaps faith is necessary, and science, for all its power, cannot provide what humans need when confronting their own extinction. You will die. Physics says you disappear. Religion says you continue. What actually happens remains, in the end, unknowable from our current position in existence. We will all discover the answer eventually, or discover there is no answer to discover because there is no one left to know. Until then, we live with uncertainty, with hope or resignation or acceptance, with faith or skepticism or agnosticism, each person finding their own way to make peace with mortality. This is the human condition. Consciousness, aware of its own ending. Life, knowing it will die. Meaning, created in the shadow of death. And somehow, despite everything, worth living, worth experiencing. Worth the temporary existence we are granted before returning to the cosmic background from which we briefly emerged as patterns, as people, as beings who wondered why we existed and what would happen when we ceased. This wondering is itself remarkable. The universe asking itself questions, consciousness pondering its own nature and fate, and finding, if not answers, at least the courage to continue existing, while the questions remain open, and the ending approaches, and the atoms that are you prepare for their next transformation into whatever comes after the pattern dissolves, and you, finally, discover what no living person knows, and no physics can tell, and no faith can prove, but every death demonstrates. What actually happens when consciousness ends, and the experiencing subject returns to the universe that made it, holding its secrets until the final moment when secrets no longer matter, because there is no one left to wonder what they were.